Sullivan on from Changing the Game Project. Uh, Personally, his podcast has been massive in my enjoyment of listening to podcasts. I was driving to Boise for regionals, and I was like, I need to start listening to something. And I threw on a few podcasts as I drove across Oregon to Boise, and I haven't stopped since. So it's just been massive, and I know what you guys will gain today will help you as coaches and leaders, and just help you do what you do even better. So I want to thank Jamie, who's the assistant technical director at North Carolina Youth Soccer, and the staff at North Carolina Youth Soccer. They've been putting on these webinars in conjunction with Oregon Youth Soccer, and they've been fantastic so far. We hope to continue to work together as we move forward. So as I said, John's a founder of Changing the Game Project. They mentor and educate all the stakeholders involved in sport. He runs a Way of Champions podcast, which is 182 episodes in. I believe he does one every single week. So keeping that streak going is probably a job all in itself. And John's also wrote a couple of books. The latest one, Every Moment Matters, which is also very good. So I guess John, Jamie, and I were curious because we have not heard, but how did you get started in this journey down with Changing the Game Project?
Well, first of all, thank you all for being here, and thanks Nelson and Jamie for having me on. It's cool, this collaboration with North Carolina, because North Carolina was a big part of the early part of my coaching career. My first, I moved there to play for the Wilmington Hammerheads back when that organization started in 1996-ish or something like that. And my first ever coaching job was the head varsity coach for boys soccer at Cardinal Gibbons High School in Raleigh. And so I coached there for a couple of years before I went on to coach college. And so I always have this, connection to North Carolina and North Carolina soccer as well. So when you said, oh, we're partnering on this, I'm like, oh, that's great. That's like perfect where I live now and where I was. But yeah, so, after playing and coaching and doing the college thing, doing the youth thing, I've been in Oregon for 14 years now. And back in 2011, I was just pretty burnt out from the politics and I lost sight of sort of my purpose and my why for coaching. And so I stepped away and said, what can I do? How can I make maybe a bigger difference? And that's when Changing the Game Project was born. And I wanted to share my experience with parents of seeing many kids through their sporting journey. And then pretty soon I'm like, well, I've also been coaching a long time. And what if we add some coaching education stuff? Because I feel like coaches were never taught that parents can be your greatest allies and they don't have to be your adversaries, but you have to be intentional about that. And so started doing a lot of coaching education as well. Have 2 books now, the podcast, the blog. And one of the coolest things about the podcast is I get to talk to so many amazing people through the podcast that, I just become, as my business partner, Jerry says, like I'm the flute and their voice comes through me. And so people like Mark Bennett, who you had on your last thing, is someone who's been very influential in my own coaching. And I feel like I was able to introduce his work to the US, and I know to you, Nelson, and, it just really makes you think about coaching in a different way. And so I've gotten to interview, 150 Mark Bennett type people who really make you, who oftentimes make me pause and make me think and say, what can I layer on to my coaching? And so then a lot of their wisdom became my latest book, Every Moment Matters, which came out in December. And yeah, now, like all of you, I'm, coaching under sort of, restricted guidelines and not traveling and speaking and presenting like I was, but doing a lot of stuff virtually like this, which it's actually been kind of nice.
Who I saw on Twitter this morning was Richard Cheatham. I think he
might
have been the first podcast that I listened to of yours, actually. So
yeah, he's great.
Yeah, no, and I think one thing that the overarching thing that I get from your podcast that really helped me is just how you define what a coach does and all the things that they do. And I think, obviously probably dive it more into this stuff, but it just seems like some people miss out on the other things that people do. They're not just a sports teacher, they're, a connector. And that's kind of where we wanted to take this today.
Sounds great. Let's go.
So John, a little history about what we've been doing with these webinars is we started with athlete-centered training philosophies. So we discussed Fanino, we discussed free play with Ted Creighton, we discussed play, practice, play. And then we started thinking about the role of the coach in that process. So that was where we got Mark Bennett on to discuss his needs-centered and performance is a behavior, not an outcome. And then when Nelson and I were talking, you were obviously the right person for this because, as Nelson said, we listened to all your podcasts, read your book. You've changed the way I approach coaching. And I know you've changed the way Nelson approaches coaching. And hopefully these things come out today throughout our conversation. But what I would like to start with is you just discussing what athlete-centered coaching looks like. Because in your book, you compare a coach-centered environment versus an athlete-centered environment. And one of your quotes is, athlete-centered coaching requires letting go of your ego by accepting that sticky learning is not always quick learning. If you could just elaborate on that for our audience.
Yeah, sure. And I have an hour to do that because that's about what that would take. No, I'm joking. Okay. So, yeah. And, I know, Mark and the work he's doing and sort of, he thought the word athlete centered was not appropriate. Right. And so he's coined this term, need centered, which is, because it's not always just what the athlete wants, but sometimes, what they need in the moment. And I agree with Mark. I think that's a very good point. And I think we can also get into a lot of semantics over language. And sometimes we do that in the sports world. What's a drill, right? And what you call a drill, someone else, we should never do drills, but what does that exactly mean? So I don't want to get caught up in the semantics, but basically I would say that my earliest coaching was I gave my players a very coach-centric experience. And I think that's how I was coached growing up in New York. It was really about the coach, right? It was about, serving his ego, serving his needs. And so I was very competitive. I was still playing. I drove the players, getting validation on, did we win? And things like that. And so if I'm being very coach centric, I'm going to solve the problems for the players, right? I'm not going to give them the space to make mistakes and figure them out. I'm not going to ask questions. I'm just going to give solutions. I'm going to basically, drive the kids and use the kids who can serve me to get that win or to win that championship over the, sort of that athlete centered or needs centered or whatever we want to call it, which is about, how do I draw the answers out of the kids? How do I give them ownership of this experience? How do I create a situation where they are allowed the time and space to solve problems? I had a guy on the podcast that I just recorded the other day, Nick Levitt from the English, who used to be with the English FA for many years. And he has this great blog and we talked about this. He said the two most important words that a coach can learn is I'm curious. So instead of saying, why did you play that pass? Why didn't you pass it to Nelson? You come in and say, I'm curious what you saw there that made you play that pass. I'm curious why you decided in that situation to take that guy on. And I think this is a really interesting thing. And after I did this interview, I practiced that night and I really tried to ask kids that, because let's face it, sometimes as a coach on the sideline, we have a completely different picture of what a kid sees on the field. What's in front of her is very different than what I think is in front of her on that, from 40 yards away, looking at it a completely different angle. And so it was interesting. I started asking kids, I'm curious why you decided to, why didn't you play the ball into the striker's feet? And they'd say, oh, well, so-and-so was in the channel. I couldn't get it there, so I played that ball. Now, from where I was standing, I didn't see it that way. And so it was a really eye-opening thing. And so I think those two words, I'm curious why you did something, starts to push you towards athlete-centered. And just giving the solution, no, that's the pass you need to play, that makes it coach-centered. And I don't think I can make it any simpler than that, is letting them have the time, the place to discover, and you're supporting them in their journey, and you're drawing out all that knowledge and creativity that's within them.
You and I know you're coaching teams and whatnot. Can you tell everybody kind of some of the long-term benefits you've seen of asking more questions, being more player-centered, that you see that has benefited the kids long-term?
Yeah, Nelson, sure. And this really, I think, kind of gets to part two of Jamie's question, which is, slow learning is sticky learning. And so this comes from a book called Range by David Epstein, Why Generalists Triumph in a Specialized World. And what we know about learning, right? So, creating a learner-centered environment is that, learning isn't just about the ability to repeat something now in the short term during this practice. It's the ability to deploy what I have learned next week or next month or next year. That's tells me someone's learned something. And so what all the evidence about learning and in practice design is that the things that we learn through struggle, the things that we learn slow, usually become the things that stick the most. And so if we shout at our right back, overlap in this situation or get wide in this situation, and we solve that for them, we say, oh, look at that great overlapping run. He didn't learn that, right? We know that, we see that. And so this, I think this all fits together. And so when you start coaching in a way that is very games based, that is has lots of decisions and defenders, and you don't block your training where we hit the same pass 50 times in a row, but we interleave it. Sometimes athletes don't feel like they're getting it because they're struggling. And as a coach, it's really hard because it would serve my ego to block my practice, and at the end of practice go, wow, look how good we are at whatever we just did, right? But then you go to the game that weekend and they can't do it because they didn't really learn it. And so what's interesting, I like the club that I work with here, we work with a guy named Todd Bean out of Barcelona who worked with Johan Cruyff for many years. And we use Todd's methodology in our club, excuse me, and it's been my job to introduce that methodology across the club. And what I have to tell all the coaches is you just have to be patient, right? Because they all grew up in this realm of technical development, and we're going to do all this isolated technical work. And then once we have all that stuff down, now we can play games. And that's not what learning tells us works, especially in a dynamic game like soccer where, you never play the same pass twice. You never hit the same shot twice. Everything's always different. And the dynamics of the environment, right? When when I do a dribbling activity and I have a kid do, run at a flag or a mannequin and do a scissor and go around it, well, like what doesn't exist that exists in the game that determines whether I do a scissor, which is where I am in the field, how fast I'm moving, where are my teammates, what's the space like behind that mannequin, what's that defender's cover, what's the situation in the game. And so when you remove all those elements, you get stuck. And so what happens is, and sorry, this is a long answer, but you sort of like, you delay that immediate gratification of, wow, look at us hitting that pass much better. But all of a sudden, 5 or 6 months later, you look at your kids and everyone's like, wow, these kids are technically so much better. But it's also because they can find space, right? And soccer is about finding and exploiting space. And if we try to teach technique without an understanding of space, as Cruyff said, great, you can go work in a circus, right? Like that's it. If you can juggle 100 times, go work in a circus, because that's not the game of football. And so I think this type of situation, you delay your gratification and you have to be patient. But if you do it, and I've done it with multiple teams now, that a lot of them were really struggling, and all of a sudden the level of play and the quality and understanding and the ownership and the kids' ability to adjust on the fly, it just becomes so much better. And they're solving the problems, and not you. Right. And that's really what I think our job is as a youth coach.
Absolutely. The experience that I have is just watching my daughter see my wife actually coaches them, and they like practice play kind of got started, and they were, I think, first grade coming out of kindergarten, and they just started doing practice play. And it was interesting because my wife's a teacher, and I think a lot of this talks about learning, and they do in school, but we actually argued about practice play and the benefits of it, but they've been diligent about doing it. And I watched her and some of her teammates, and they solve problems technically that I don't think if they were just dribbling around cones, they would. Like, it's almost natural for her to default to her left foot quite often. So I think just seeing that reality-based training has paid off for them so far after a couple of years of just doing it. And they're not a world beater team or anything like that, but they just seem to enjoy it. And, despite trying to get her to do other sports, like soccer's her favorite. And I think the environment has helped with that.
Well, I think also, like the word enjoyment is so important, right? Why did they stand up? Why did they sign up, right? No one signed up and said, I hope we stand in line today. Right? Like, they signed up to play. They signed up to be Megan Rapinoe. They signed up to be Lindsey Horan, Tobin Heath, whatever it is. Right. And so let them play, let them do those things, focus on that enjoyment aspect, because if you have enjoyment and if you have ownership, then you get intrinsic motivation to go home and practice those things. Right. I mean, I don't think there's any coaches on this call who was like, I have too much practice time, I need to give some back, right? So we were so limited in our time with our kids. Why would we gather in big groups to train alone? Like, come up with little homework assignments, send them home to do little bits of stuff on their own. But then we come back and we give, and we do activities. Right. I'll teach passing in a 4v1 well over teaching passing in, pass and follow your pass to another line. Right. And I can pull a kid out and say, come here, lock your ankle here. See that? Get your toe up, heel down, bend your knee, lock your ankle, plant foot here. Let's hit a couple passes. Boom, get back in there. Right. But now that kid is getting repetitions of passing, but at the same time, she's having to look for a defender. Where am I going to pass it next? What foot am I going to receive the ball on? Right. And that's what a rondo does. And that's what those type of activities do, which is the game of soccer.
Absolutely. Well, is there some toolkit options? You were talking about a couple there. Are there toolkit options that a coach has that you feel are the most player centric that can help coaches that are listening to really dive into being more player centered?
Well, I think first of all, like, begin at the end, which is you have to know what it's supposed to look like on Saturday, right? Like, I don't think you can run practices and teach the game if you don't have some idea of this is how we want to play on the weekend. And so I think if you start there, then you say, okay, if we want to do this on the weekend, then what activities do I have to use in my practice today to get to that? And then I start working backwards, right? Are these activities enjoyable? Will they replicate what we want to see on the weekend? And, do they fit into, can I work in my mental skills and my values into this so I can demonstrate, that how being resilient or being fearless or, being a hard worker, all these things are going to make me a better soccer player too. All these core values of our club or our team or whatever. And so that's what you should really ask yourself is, right, are the activities appropriate age and stage? Do they mimic what we're trying to get at? Do they provide enjoyment and fun? And then at the end of practice, you ask yourself, did we accomplish what we set out to do, and stuff like that. But I think a lot of people, and again, myself included early on, just ran activities or games that we liked, and they weren't tied towards a common purpose of what do we want to do on the weekend. And certainly, I get 90 minutes twice a week with the group that I coach. And there's tons of games where I'm like, why aren't the fullbacks overlapping? Or, why isn't this happening? And then I'm like, you know what? We haven't really done that yet. Right. Because I can't get to everything in practice. And so, I have to teach positioning before I teach positions. And I have to help them understand space before I can tell them this. If they don't understand space, they'll never understand why I should be wide or why I should come inside in this moment. And so anyway, a lot of us, if we pick up a 12-year-old team, unless we're in a great organization, sometimes you're cleaning up the messes of the 10s and 11-year-old coaches. And I think great clubs have this way that they want to play, and then that trickles down. So we train a certain way at 8 and 9 and 10 and 11 because we want to play this certain way. We play a formation in 7-a-side that allows us to go to 9-a-side, that allows us to go to 11-a-side. But the basic principles and the movements are very similar. And if you go to, Barcelona's having a really bad week right now, but like if you go to, La Masia, you see, the rondos they run and the patterns that they do, like you see them come out in the games. You can see the training activities coming out in the games, and that these certain movements have happen over and over and over. And they play 7-a-side in Spain till they're U14s, right? And they play a 3-2-1, right? And whenever the keeper gets the ball, the two wing fullbacks push super high, and one of the central midfielders drops out of the middle and like empties the midfield, so it almost looks like a 2-3-1 at that point, right? And then it opens up space in the middle, and the wingers are taking people on, and the goalkeeper has given us an extra number to keep it in the back. And you watch the 9-year-olds play, they do it, and the 11-year-olds play and they do it, and the 13-year-olds play and they do it. And it's really cool.
So John, I want to transition a little bit and talk about, you spoke about the enjoyment of the game and making it fun for the kids. And then you spoke about intrinsic motivation. And so I would like to transition to talking about the relationship that you build with the individual and why that's important when it does come time to play the game.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I just think of, I think about, I don't know, I can't see everyone's picture on here, but I'm just going to assume that of our participants, right, some are younger coaches and some are older and, have their own children or whatever. And I think about, if you have your own kids, I have a 13 and a 14-year-old, I would do anything for them, but because I love them and I respect them. And if, some 6'7", tattooed crazy guy was attacking them, even though he'd kick my butt, I'd jump in because it's my kids. Right. That's an environment of love and respect where you do anything for someone versus like fear and intimidation. Right. You see some giant guy, beating on someone else. You're like, I might not get involved in that, So I think in the grand scheme of things, if I am intentional about building a relationship, about getting to know each kid on the team and what makes him or her tick, then I am far more likely to get the best out of him or her, right? Because they know, Coach Jamie's in it for me, right? And if I know as a player that my coach is in it for me, then I'm going to do the things that the team's asking me to do. But if I think that coach is in it for his or her own ego, if I think coach is in it for someone else, then you're very unlikely to see my very best. And I think as a young coach, I was, I connected great with some kids and I didn't connect with others. And you're never going to connect with everybody, but I think you can always make that effort. And it doesn't take a lot. like catching that kid being good that one time, just telling them, it doesn't have to be like fake praise. It's just saying that I see you, right? I see you struggling today. I know you're getting frustrated, but that's okay. Come on, just try to, just get your head up. You made great progress, and we all have bad days. I have bad days too, right? That tells a kid, coach sees me in this big group and coach wants to help me. And, when kids make mistakes, right, and they start having this like fight or flight response, this is a physiological thing. Your field of vision narrows, right? So when a kid's having a bad game and they've made 4 passes in a row, and then you expect them, the next time they get the ball to see that teammate 45 yards away and hit that switch, they can barely see 5 yards in front of them because they're in this like super narrow focused vision around themselves. And so understanding that about a kid and saying, look, I know you're struggling right now. Here's an idea. Just, next time you get it, just, give the ball to so-and-so. She's always really close to you. Right. And play your way out of this and play 2 or 3 good passes and then move on. Right. Then try to hit that crazy ball. And I think that's the kind of stuff that like, even pros deal with. And so we have to remember that we're working with children. And so just fight hard to make those connections. As Tony DeCicco said, catch them being good. Don't just be, there's this great book. I thought I had it here. Yeah. This book right here. It was one I've read this break, Coaching Athletes to Be Their Best Using Motivational Interviewing, Stephen Rolnick. And he uses this word in this book. He says, as coaches, sometimes we're deficit detectors or deficit detectives, I think he says, right? So all we do is we're looking for and pointing out the mistakes, right? But can we be a strengths finder sometimes as well? Right. And if we can be a strengths finder and not just someone who always points out what's wrong, we can be better. The other way we can do this sometimes is, you have big groups of kids. Sometimes you don't do it during practice. Use TeamSnap or whatever you use to communicate with your team. And after practice, just send 2 notes. Take 2-3 minutes, send a note to a kid saying, Jamie, I saw you working hard in practice today. I know it wasn't your best day, but you know what? You've made such great progress. You're working so hard. You're such an important part of this team. And I really appreciate what you've been doing. Boom. That can fuel a kid for a month. Right. And plus what I do is if I send that through TeamSnap, guess what? Their parents read it as well. So now the parents know, hey, he sees my kid. He's supporting my kid. He's in it for my kid. And now they're on my side too. And they'll see their kid, they'll read it and go, oh, this is nice. And they'll hand it to their son or their daughter. And they'll watch their son's face light up when he reads it and just see that enthusiasm. And now you're building that bond with the parents as well, which is equally as important.
So going off of that, John, you shared on one of your podcasts, you had a player who wasn't giving a lot of effort, and I think they were supposed to be covering the post on a corner kick, and you took him out of the game, but you weren't happy with the way that you communicated what you saw to the player. Can you explain, first of all, assuming you know what I'm talking about, can you explain to everyone what happened next?
You'd have to be more specific because I screw up like that often. But I mean, I can think about like just, different moments where, again, we see something from 50 or 75 yards away. And sometimes, the players see something different on the field, right? Of, I needed to do this or I needed to do that. I don't know. I think sometimes too, right? Like I have kids, probably like all of our listeners do, that, you have kids who miss a lot of practices, and it's very easy to take that out on the kid who misses practices. And so, yeah, they don't know where to be when there's a corner kick. They miss that session. But when I coach 12-year-olds, it's not the kid's fault that he's not there. It's usually a work situation or mom or dad didn't sort out his ride or whatever. And so it's trying to find this hard balance that I'm not going to be upset at this kid who's not driving. If I'm coaching 18-year-olds, yeah, you're driving yourself, sort it out, figure it out, right? But not when you're 12. And so, yeah, I've had kids where they're in the wrong spot on a set piece or something like that, and I'm very upset at them. And so therefore, what I also work hard on is like, getting their teammates to take ownership of this as well. So, hey, you're in charge, right? If someone's out of position, you get them in the right position too. So I'm giving them ownership of, why my goalkeeper should know exactly who should be on the post in this moment. My center back should be sorting out matchups, defending a corner kick or things like that. I mean, I'm not sure if that's the answer you're looking for. And so you can cue it up for me better if you want.
Yeah. So first, I'll apologize for not teeing it up properly. But what I was looking for is you spoke briefly about sending a quick message. And as a coach, I think we've all been in a situation where we're not happy with the way that our point was received by a player. And so the follow-up and not being afraid to send a quick email or communicate with that player and parent via Team Snap to let them know that you weren't happy with the way that you communicated.
Yeah, and that's it, right? Is like mess up, tidy up. And so just like we want our players to tidy up after, as a coach, I have to tidy up after. I have to be able to say, you know what, that didn't come across the right way there. And I apologize for that. And it's an impactful thing for kids because, their teachers don't usually apologize and parents don't apologize. And so, showing that, hey, sometimes I got it wrong is a really big thing. And that's the ownership thing too. Like if you give a team talk and you come into your team talk, and I've seen this on college teams, and you start blaming the backs for giving up 2 goals, and they're like, well, if our freaking midfielders track their men, or, if our forwards could finish a chance, we'd be fine here. Right. And so if you start pointing the finger, the blame just sort of trickles down. But if you come in as a coach and you own it and you say, hey guys, look, I didn't, it's a good team out there and I haven't really prepared us well enough for this. So that one's on me. So let's fix this. Hey, forwards, what do you think you guys could do? What could we do this half that's a little better? Right? Backs, how can we match up a little bit better? Right? And then all of a sudden everyone says, yeah, we could do this better. We could do this. And now everyone owns a little bit more of it as well. And so I think in a nutshell, that's what it is. And you can do that on an individual basis. You can do that on a team basis. But if you show a little bit of vulnerability and say, I screwed up, you can repair a relationship before it gets damaged permanently. And you can also get kids to be more accountable because they see you being accountable as well.
I really, I think what I see a lot that really detracts from like the fun aspect and like the relationship thing is, when you start creating a bunch of anxiety of like, why weren't you at practice? Why are you late? This sort of things that are really just start creating a lot of friction between a coach and a player. When is that really the battle you should choose with your players, especially when it's not their fault? But I really feel like this anxiety as it builds up, like, oh, I can't make a mistake in a game or I get yelled at, that sort of thing. I think those are the things that probably detract from kids wanting to continue to play any sport in general, because like it creates anxiety instead of being a place where they feel safe to be themselves.
Totally. And I think, you can't, you'll never play your best in that state of fear, right? In that state of anxiety. And it's far better if you have a kid who, for the most part, is a great kid and competitive and works hard, and they're having a bad day. What's more impactful, right? And we can think about this in our own work lives, right? Nelson, I know you really well. You're a guy, you show up every day, you work hard. If you're having a bad day at work and something is wrong, if your boss comes in or your coworker comes in and say, Nelson, you don't seem like yourself today. Is everything okay? Because usually you're right on top of this stuff. That's when you're like, oh yeah, got in a fight with my wife, or my daughter's sick, or just some crazy stuff going on at home, which affects what you bring to practice. Right. And so if we say to one of our players, hey, you don't, is everything okay? because you don't seem like yourself today. You're not really focused. You're a little bit out of it. And man, you're such a good player when you're really focused and giving your great effort. And that's when the kid might go, yeah, coach, sorry, just, whatever happened. And then that gives you insight into him. That gives you insight into her. And I remember once I had a girl who I coached here, and, she went on and Pac-12 soccer player and pro player. And I remember one day just ripping her a new one at practice because, she was just awful on the day. And that wasn't her, and I never stopped to ask why. And then one of the kids like, her grandma died this morning. And then it was like so close. And I felt like such an idiot, right? Because this was a great kid who did everything I ever asked. And she was super close to her grandma. Like our whole team had gone to regionals and gone to her grandma's house, and her grandma had died. And I didn't take the moment to find that out, because if I had known that, I would have said, hey, KP, you want to be here today? And if you don't, no problem. And then when she's having a bad thing, it's like, hey, it's okay. Just enjoy yourself today. Right. And so these are the kind of interactions that shed light and make us a far better coach, I think, than a one size fits all type approach to it.
Yeah, and that's super powerful. I had a similar story in my younger days of coaching too, and just made me realize, like, and I think this probably goes back to what Mark says, is like when we show up to coach, what are we scanning for? What are we looking for? And once you really dial into knowing these kids, like you can say, hey, they don't look like they're having a great day. Like, hey, come on over here. Like, what's going on? And you're like, you okay today? Like, I noticed you're not working as hard as normal, or you just seem distracted. And yeah, the impact that makes when you're on that personal level, just, I think it goes miles and miles of getting the best out of those kids long term.
Yeah, I mean, I think I talked about it in the book. Like, I remember one time I had a group of girls, 13 years old or whatever, and it was the first day of school, and I had this, super complex, great practice that we were all going to run, and these are middle school girls, right? And here's this thing, and they're just, they show up, and 4 of them have been crying at some point because it's middle school and whatever, and it's all freaked out, and the boy they like doesn't like them anymore, and all this sort of stuff. And it was the worst practice ever. It was so off, so distracted, so whatever. And then at the end of that practice, I was just like, I'm such an idiot. Why did I pick the first day of school when the kids are exhausted and just, been through the ringer to do some complex tactical practice or whatever? And so like the B team comes in next, and I'm just like, all right, guys, we're just going to play 15-minute games, breaks in between, use some of Mark's stuff. Hey, when we took a break, like, what's working, what's not working, all this sort of stuff. And we just played. And at the end of that practice, those kids were like, Coach, thanks so much. That was like the most fun practice. That's exactly what I needed today. Right. So I was the one who totally let down the first group of kids by asking them. And so that next practice I saw them, I showed up, I said, hey guys, anyone have anything to say about practice on Tuesday? And they were like, oh, it wasn't good and this and that. And I'm like, well, let me say something. That's my fault. I'm like, that was completely wrong by me. That whatever we did in practice, we should have just played, and we should have just enjoyed ourselves because it was the first day of school. So I apologize to you guys for that. I didn't do a good job that day. I'm going to do a better job today. Right. And that builds that bond and that trust of like, and again, that's my ego out of the way. And that's 48-year-old John, who's a very different person than 28-year-old John, the coach.
Well, speaking of that, like, at what point in being player centered and whatnot, do you feel that kids get comfortable saying, hey coach, practice was off today, or hey, like I need this type of coaching from you to really excel, right? And really get down into what they're looking for.
I mean, I think as a coach, you have to be comfortable with it, and you have to create that environment where when people give you that type of feedback, it's accepted, even if you disagree with it. Because if you just trash that and like, no, you're wrong, that's stupid, you're not going to ever get it again. It's been really interesting, during COVID, and I have no idea what practice has been in North Carolina, but obviously in Oregon, we've been through different stages of, our county and our club was one of the first ones to open up, and kids in a box to kids with contact. And it was amazing after a number of weeks off, right? Some kids were fit and some kids weren't, and it's really hot out and all this sort of stuff is happening. And then we moved into contact without masks, and then we switched to now we could still have contact, but kids had to play in masks, right? And it's 96 degrees outside. And so I encourage all the coaches, working with me, of like, we need to be asking like, hey, how is you doing? Okay. Do we need a break? How can we tweak practice? And really getting feedback from the kids. Like, do you want to play again? Or, should we just back it off for a second? Because, hey, can we just strike some balls for 5 minutes? And, it's super hot right now. Let's, knock a ball with a partner and pull our mask down and just breathe for a while. And then let's play again later. And so COVID for me has made me solicit a lot of feedback from the kids, just in terms of training intensity and workload and things like that maybe in the past, if you can't handle the intensity and the workload, that's on you, versus now it's like, hey, you're trying to do it with a mask on in 90-degree weather. That's not necessarily on you.
And going off of that, John, in your book, without giving too much away,
you can give away as much as you want, man. I don't care. That's what it's there for.
Well, so you talk about, this is something I took from you that I use with my players, and it really changed the dynamic and the relationship that I built with them, was having them write on a note card one thing I wish my coach knew, and then asking them, how can I coach you better? And the power that comes with those two activities.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm glad that you picked that up. I think that's one of the things when I teach in person and I ask people, to write that down, that people are like, everyone always writes that down, because they haven't really considered that. Because most of the times when we're brought up as coaches, right, none of my, Eastern European coaches that I grew up with in New York ever asked me how they could coach me better, right? They didn't care. And so so that statement of, one thing I wish my coaches knew me that would help them coach me better. And what I always ask is like, don't put like, make my left foot better. Like, I'll figure that out. Tell me something that I wouldn't know. And that's when the kid says, my parents are getting divorced. My dad has cancer. My dog died. Whatever it is, right? I don't like to be first in line. I'd much prefer if you pull me aside and tell me something one-on-one rather than yell it out to the group. These are things that are really important to know and make you a better coach for those kids. And so I think if we as coaches get that insight and we keep it and we don't share it with the team, right? That belongs to us. You might, really just get some powerful stuff. And then I always, when I do meetings with players, I have one coming up here in 2 days. A parent just said, hey, can we sit down with you and chat? I always ask that at the end, right? How can I be a better coach from you? What do you want from me? And I don't always get great answers because they're shocked by the question. And so I say, what I'd like you to do is really think about that. And in a day or two, send me an email. Let me know how I can be a better coach for you. And I've been a better coach for kids because they've told me how they want to be coached. Now, this isn't about like lowering standards, right? And they can't say, oh, let me come late and leave early. Like, that's not what we're talking about. This is just, how can I communicate with you? How can I connect? How can I, I mean, I've had young kids who are that kid who will always play, center back for the team because the team needs a center back, but says, hey, coach, can you like, let me play some winger once in a while? Like, I'd really like to play, and they would never say that in front of the team because they want to do their best for their group. But at the same time, like, yeah, of course I can, so it's things like that are really helpful.
I found it fascinating, John, the things that you can learn about players and what's going on in their life just through that simple gesture.
Yeah.
Another thing that I find interesting that I learned from you when you gave a speech in Oregon, in Portland, Oregon, to a bunch of coaches, you talked about setting the team values.
Mm-hmm.
And can you explain how you go about setting team values for your team?
Yeah. I don't know if you can read that behind me, but like right there was my, '07 boys, fun and enjoyment, resilience, and family. Right. And we use that. We did that via Zoom during quarantine where we couldn't go out in our weekly meeting. Right. We did probably what everyone else here did. We did, you know, we said hello, we did some fun stuff, we did practices and technical skills, and then I just use that time one time, like, we're going to come up with who we are as a group, right? And so I asked the kids, come up with 3 words that describe us, that describe a great teammate, or come up with 3 words or 3 things that when we are at our very best, this is what we're doing. And so then I went around the whole Zoom room and I tallied up the answers. All right. And behind that sheet I just showed you is actually the answer sheet of like all the words they came up with. And then we looked at, okay, well, which ones have the most? And it was really around this idea of this is supposed to be fun. And we're really good when we're positive and we're a family, because if anyone here has coached middle school boys, they have 0 filter, and whatever they're thinking comes out to their teammate, right? Which is the exact opposite of middle school girls. Right. And then, like resilience and competitiveness and work hard and be really good at practice. And so that was an hour of work to come up with that and take that picture and send it to their parents and weave it into our emails of like, this is what we're about this year. Right. And when we are a positive, supportive family, and when we compete super hard at practice and get the behavior right, as Mark Bennett would say, right? And then if coach, makes this enjoyable and fun, then we're going to be good. And I've had this group for a little over a year now, and it's amazing how many parents have said, my kid was really kind of burnt out with soccer and wanted to walk away, and now he can't wait for practice. He's been devastated that we had 8 weeks off or whatever, right? And so I'm always asking myself, like, and those values reflect my values too. Right. That's that. I would come up with very similar words. I would come up with accountability and competitiveness and family and enjoyment. Right. That's what matters to me. And so it's very easy to coach within that framework that they want, because that's what I want. And I think we didn't do this right away with the group, just because of logistics. But I think because I bring these things every day, this became clear that this is what we're all about. And so to be my best authentic self as a coach, right, then this environment has to be what matters most to me. And for me, coaching youth sports, it's always going to be enjoyment first, right? It's always going to be enjoyment. I want kids smiling and saying, I can't wait to do that again.
Yeah, I think that, is that similar to like having non-negotiables as a coach in some ways?
For sure. And when I worked with Mark, we talked about this, right? Like what is, was acceptable, unacceptable, and excellent, I think is his word or whatever, exceptional. But what happens is that these values or these behaviors, they become non-negotiables, right? So if you're not being a positive, supportive teammate, if you're not competing hard, that's never okay here, and you're going to be called out for it, right? Hopefully by your teammates before your coach has to do it, right? And when you create that type of environment, all of a sudden, practice is good every single day. Like this group I had before here, which is like 05 girls, when I took over that group, the 2 teams in the age group, like the year prior, had a combined record of like 0 wins, 42 losses, and 1 tie. Right. And it was like, and I told the parents, I'm like, the first 4 months, we're going to learn how to practice, because we are terrible at practice. right? Half the team's kind of here, half doesn't care, half cares. I'm like, we're never going to win games until we're really good at practice. And then if we get really good at practice every day and we show up and we compete and we hold each other accountable and work hard, we're going to get better and better and better, right? And so I think our greatest thing as a coach is, can we create that practice environment where we are getting better every single day? That's a non-negotiable, right? You want to come here and fool around and not pay attention, you're in the wrong place, right? This is going to be a very uncomfortable place for you. And because we're working with young kids, are there kids that I have to remind of that from time to time? Heck yeah. Right. And I've pulled kids aside during the summer. I'm like, you know what? Like, you're not working hard. You're not focused today. You know, maybe you've been at the lake all day and you've toasted yourself in the sun. That was your choice. If you want to play, knock it off and play. Or, I mean, you're welcome to go sit down and just not be a part of this today. But you're not welcome to drag the whole group down because you don't feel like working hard today. And it's amazing how quickly kids kind of shape up around that, right? Peer pressure is a good thing sometimes.
I did have one question that somebody sent that is fairly good, because I think it kind of ties everything together, and you mentioned it earlier on, but Coach Gregory's basically asking, like, that he heard you talking about this being a good time for reset in the mindset of parenting. How do you engage parents in trying to move from the scoreboard to like this player-centered approach and more about development than results?
Well, I think, Greg, first that comes from trust, right? They have to trust that you have the best interest of their son or their daughter in mind, that you have a big picture and a plan, right? And so that when you're asking them to be patient, it's because you understand that if we do these certain things over time, their son or daughter is going to get better. And it's really hard, right? We have this massive cult of the Head Start for parents and this massive rush to do more, younger. And so many parents aren't patient, right? And that's where I think when we're really reaching out to kids, if we have an exceptional kid on our team, right, and the parents are, well, we got to get out of here, this isn't good enough, and yet the kid's enjoying themselves, like, okay, how can we make this more challenging for you? Can you, if you're a girl, can you go practice with the boys? Can you practice up with an older age? All these sort of things that, I mean, if you're a younger boy, go practice with the, go find something that challenges you so that this is a good experience. We had the podcast we released this week was this guy, Michael Murphy, and he wrote this amazing book 40, 50 years ago now called Golf in the Kingdom. And he said something on the podcast that was really cool, talking about athletes. And he said, great athletes see the field from above. Right. And so he was talking about an NFL running back who, instead of doing the play that was called to get 5 yards, he popped wide and ran for 50. And the coaches said, what did you do? And his answer was, well, you're coaching of what's in front of me, but I see the field from above. And I think as coaches, we see the field from above. We see that this is the ball should be played because the space is over here. And maybe our job is to get our players to see the field from above. I love, bringing my little tactics board out to practice and say, okay, here's what this looks like right here. Where's the space, right? And if they can see the big picture, they know that, hey, here's the time to switch it. Or if I'm a central midfielder, I got to turn out and play the other way. But I say that because I think as a parent, we need to get our parents to see this experience, this 10 years of youth sports from above, and not just what's in front of my face right now. This is a blog that I'm working on because it really made me think. So many parents are standing in the play and only seeing what's in front of me this week or this month or the next 6 months, instead of seeing it from above and looking at this 10-year journey, 12-year journey, 14-year journey of youth sports. And what do I want in that journey? Not just what do I want in this little slice of it. And so many parents, because of society and social media, they're looking at the slice. And if we can be trusted mentors and we can give them good information and we can get them to see that this is just a small part of this bigger puzzle, they're more likely to take a deep breath and be okay with it.
Absolutely. I think you said it earlier, right? Start with the end in mind. Like if your kids, when you picture your kid graduating from high school, what did this sports experience add to them being prepared for life?
Exactly. And as we're seeing now with, sadly, sports like gymnastics and stuff, with Athlete A documentary, and ESPN 30 for 30 just did this podcast series on the Karolyis as coaches. So many parents just saw what was in front of them, which was trying to make an Olympics or trying to do that. And we've got this, hundreds of athletes who have been physically, mentally, sexually abused because none of those parents would say, when this is all done, I want a kid who's destroyed because of sport. But that's really what's happened to hundreds and hundreds of kids. And that's a loss of perspective there. That's really sad.
100%.
So John, is there anything we didn't discuss today that you would like to share?
I mean, I think we covered a lot of ground. Obviously, if anyone has any questions, please use the chat room and put them in. I read this quote in his recently passed away college baseball coach, and he said something, and he put it in a way that it really meant something. And he was a religious guy. I don't think you have to be religious to believe this. He said, my greatest fear is that when I die, I go to the pearly gates and St. Peter says to me, God gave you 1,000 boys to turn into men, and you turned them into baseball players, but you didn't turn them into men. He goes, I never want to have that conversation. And so I think as coaches, that's what we really have to think about as well, that we've been given these kids to do something more than turn them into soccer players. We're supposed to turn them into young men and young women. And that goes far beyond teaching them to kick or pass or dribble. It's about, developing them as a human being, their competence, their confidence, their character. And if we do that, I think the soccer part will follow as well. And the players who are truly special, right? They're the ones who are picking up the ball outside of practice. They're the ones who want more. They're going to find their way. They're going to be great. But we're just kind of facilitating their journey. But regardless of whether they get hurt or injured or don't make it as a player, we can still make sure they became a better person during their time with us.
Yep. Well said. Very well said. Had one more question come in that I think is I've heard a lot in coaching education when we talk about leading the player. How do you make sure that you create time or manage your time so that the players do get that? I mean, are you doing it outside of practice or inside of practice?
I think that's the toughest thing. In my personal situation here today, right? I'm coming on to a training session after the group ahead of me finishes, right? So it's not like I can show up half an hour early and set up the field, right? So that as the kids come, I can be chatting with them all. So I have to set that up. I have to do my best to kind of greet them when they come on. So I'm there early as the kids are showing up early. I'm saying, what's up? How are you doing, Nelson? Hey, how was your trip to Wyoming? Things are good. I'm trying to make those connections. I'm trying to find them during the water break or times of practice. I'm doing my best to catch them at the end, but then I'm also trying to follow up if I haven't done that. And I'm missing a bunch of them, right? But I'm doing my best. I'm trying to get as many as I can, and be intentional about who's a kid that hasn't gotten a compliment from me in a while, right? Let me go catch him. I think that's the best we can do, man, is just do our very best with what we have. Like my group, I have 2 teams, and in the summer we train together. So some days I got 28 kids at practice. There's no way I'm getting around to 28 kids, right? Some days there's only 16 of us because people are out camping, and now I can. So I think that's it. Like, we just have to say that, hey, in the moment, right, I'm going to do my very best. But if I really pay attention to making, catching every kid once every 2-3 weeks with something, then I'm going to get almost all of them.
Yeah, one thing I've suggested to coaches that I feel helped me disconnect myself from trying to play the game for the kids is using times around the game, like you said, before and after the game, but especially during the game when you can in some ways focus on the soccer piece a little bit more, but also focus on the personal piece. Like you have that opportunity. Like I feel like every kid should play and play about as equally as possible when I manage games. So everybody's coming out at some point in time. And I always try to recommend, like, hey, why not use that time to just debrief with the kid? Like, how are they doing? Here's some soccer stuff that I'm seeing. Like, hey, I loved how hard you worked this week. I see it coming out in the game, etc. So, but tried to offering that as a suggestion to coaches as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I, we always say like 3 questions, right? What went well, what needs work, and then maybe throw in the third one. Jamie said, right? How can I be a better coach for you right now? Right. So don't just focus on that deficit, but what's going well, what's working for us right now, what needs work, how can we work on that in practice? And I think that's a great way to do it.
Sure. Well, want to be respectful and say thank you very much for your time today. I know the impact that you've made on Jamie and I's coaching and just how we view coaching in general. So massive thank you from both state associations. I've already got messages saying thanks to the impact that you're making to the coaches that are on here today. So keep up the great work. We're always listening and checking in. So we really appreciate your time.
Yeah, well, thank you guys, and anyone listening. I mean, just changingthegameproject.com is the mothership, and or Amazon for any of the books or anything like that. And yeah, the podcast is Way of Champions, and I got Christy Rampone coming up here soon. I'm actually interviewing her next week. She's got a new book out. So
Nice.
so we're hitting the soccer stuff. All right.
Cool. Well, thanks everybody for joining us, and thank you again, John.
Yeah, perfect.
Thanks, John.
Bye, guys.
See you.
Thanks, guys.